This is a brief lecture about the history of psychology. When people hear the word psychology, they are often thinking about things like the words crazy or mentally ill or even Freud. What many don't understand yet is that psychology studies the scientific part of the mind and behavior. This includes the private inner experience of our perceptions, our feelings, our thoughts, things like that. Behavior is a part of psychology. That means we study the observable actions, what we do by ourselves, and what we do with other people. From a historical perspective, psychology is a really pretty young field. You could say that it started with Plato and Aristotle, and they were philosophers who were struggling to find out how the mind worked. These two set up the age-old debate of nature and nurture. Is the mind and the behavior knowledge through our innate abilities, which is nature, or is it acquired through learning, which is nurture? In this field, we refer to the different schools of thought. That means that each theorist contributes a certain belief system and approach, and that explores how they think the mind and behavior works. And I'll address each one of those series briefly in this video and then more detailed in others. The first school is called structuralism, and it basically means that we break down all the basic elements that constitute the mind, and we study that. Wilhelm Wundt, my best accent on that one, he opened the psychology lab, the very first psychology lab in Germany. And so we think of him as the father of psychology, whereas many people think that it's Freud. He thought that we should use introspection, which is a method that asks people to report the contents of their subjective experience. Another theorist that entered the field is William James, and he agreed with Wundt about the importance of introspection, but he also disagreed too, and you'll find a lot of this throughout all of these different schools of thought. He claimed that consciousness couldn't be broken down into separate elements. He thought that functionalism, or the study of the purpose that mental processes serve, is the best way to look at our mind and our behavior. And so he was a lot like Darwin in that he believed that the ultimate function of our psychological processes is to help us survive and reproduce. The next one is Sigmund Freud. Most everybody knows him. And he developed the psychoanalytic theory, but he wasn't by himself. There was Jung and Adler and several other people as well. But he emphasizes the importance of the unconscious mental processes in shaping feelings, thoughts, and behaviors. And so when you think of the unconscious, we often think of Freud. In the humanistic school of thought, we have figures like Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, and they pioneered the understanding of human nature that emphasizes the positive potential of human beings. What can you do? Behaviorism was the idea that psychology should restrict itself from studying things that they could not see and start studying things that they could see. So some major figures in this area are John Watson, Ivan Pavlov, everybody's familiar with him, and B.F. Skinner. Between the 1930s and the 40s, behaviorism was really the hot field of psychology, and after that was one called Gestalt psychology, which emphasized the active role that our mind plays in generating a perceptual experience. So it's how we perceive things. Major theorists in this area are Wertheimer and Kurt Lewin. In the 50s, computers really began to surface, and so that influenced a new approach called cognitive psychology. This is the scientific study of mental processes, which includes perception, thought, memory, and reasoning. During World War II, the military began turning to psychologists to start assessing their soldiers, and they used cognitive psychology. So as our world grew, so did the field of psychology, like every other field. Evolutionary psychologists came onto the scene and tried to explain our mind and behaviors in terms of the adaptable abilities that we have. So we adapt and we preserve ourselves through natural selection. Social psychologists realized that they wanted to get their information in there too, so they started studying the causes and consequences of sociality. So when Hitler came on the scene and many people were victims of genocide, they started studying why people complied with Hitler when they knew that it wasn't the best thing for them to do. So cultural psychologists is the next type of psychology we'll talk about, and it studies how cultures reflect and shape the psychological processes of their members. So wherever you were brought up, whatever ethnicity, whatever race, how much money you make, even your gender, that all influences your psyche and your behaviors according to the cultural psychologists. So all of these theories up to this point were really developed through white men, old white men. So when it came to studying different cultures such as women, other races, other ethnicities, the field was really lacking. And so people like Mary Whiton Calkins, she was the first woman who was refused an official PhD from Harvard, but she later wrote many books. She was a lecturer. She became the APA president. So she really paved the way for women. And Kenneth Clark was the first member of a minority group to be the APA president, as well as Francis Cecil Sumner, the first African American to receive a PhD in psychology. So now that you know all of the theories, what can we do with it? Psychology is such a broad science that not everyone with a degree in psychology goes on to be a psychologist. Not everybody's going to be Freud. So with my bachelor's degree in psychology, when I started out, I made more money working as a blackjack dealer on a casino than I did with my degree. So I realized I had to go to graduate school, which is what a lot of other graduates with psychology realize. But you can use that degree in so many different fields. Psychology careers are really divided up, each having their own science and their own practice. Clinical psychologists work in usually a private setting, private practice or hospital, but they can also work with other doctors in medical schools. And they focus really on the clinical types of problems, anxiety, depression, those kinds of illnesses. Counseling psychologists help people in dealing with work or career issues, common crises like divorce, separations, that kind of stuff, unemployment. School psychologists offer guidance to students and teachers, whereas industrial and organizational psychologists focus on issues in the workplace. They're often employed by organizations to handle their employee issues. So what I've seen in my career is that people with a degree in psychology use their knowledge in a variety of jobs. You don't have to limit yourself to just one area, which is really great. These include social workers, psychiatric technicians at hospitals, probation and parole officers, teachers, behavioral analysts, vocational counselors, community mental health, even blackjack dealers on casinos. So I always say that psychology is everywhere, and now you can see why.